Another assassination in a string of political killings and more unrest in Lebanon. Is the country plunging deeper into crisis? And what's ahead? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome. I'm Jane Dutton. A day of national mourning in Lebanon over an assassination that's threatening the country's fragile peace. Member of Parliament Waleed Eido, an anti-Syrian, was killed Wednesday when a bomb ripped through his car in West Beirut. The blast also killed Eido's eldest son and 8 others. He was buried Thursday after hundreds marched behind his coffin. Eido is the 7th anti-Syrian figure to be assassinated since February 2005. And that's when former Prime Minister al-Hariri was killed in a truck bombing. The United Nations just began setting up a special tribunal to try suspects in that case on Monday. Now, all the politicians killed over the past 2 years were outspoken about Syrian influence in Lebanon. Some Lebanese blame Hariri's assassination and the ones that followed on Syria. And now many of Eido's allies are blaming his assassination on those they hold responsible for previous attacks, Damascus.
These are the same perpetrators who targeted martyr Rafiq Hariri and other martyrs of freedom. These are the apparatus of evil who are planting seeds of terror all over Lebanon. These are the same ones who have perpetrated the assassination today of MP Waleed Eido. They do not want Lebanon to be resting and feeling well. They do not want the Lebanese government to be established.
But Syria condemned the assassination of Waleed Eido, saying it had nothing to do with the killing. In a statement, its foreign ministry said Syria strongly denounces this crime and condemns the campaign of lies by some Lebanese used to accuse Syria after any killing and before an investigation even starts. Well, we're joined by our guests from Beirut, Ibrahim Kanan, opposition member of Lebanese Parliament, Mesbah al-Akhdab, a member of the majority bloc in the Lebanese parliament, and from Paris, Joseph Bahout, professor at Sciences Po Paris. Thank you all for joining us. Mr. Akhdab, it's been a day of mourning. Can you tell us what the mood is like in the country?
Well, the mood is like everybody knows about those threats that we've been going through since a while. And of course, it's a very sad day having an assassination, so a continuation of the serial of killings. In fact, everybody knows, though, that there are 2 different things that are happening. One is that we already have a mechanism, an international tribunal, that would put an end to impunity. And number 2, that even though we were facing threats, but we are witnessing the restructuring of the military apparatus in Lebanon. Here I'm talking about the Lebanese armed forces and the internal security forces. But even though we have those 2 different points on our side, it is obvious that those who are perpetrating those assassinations in order to destabilize Lebanon have not been stopped by the International Tribunal, but I think that they definitely will have more problems to hire some new people.
Because that was expected, wasn't it, that the International Tribunal would put some sort of stop to these assassinations? That was the hope.
Well, I think it did. It definitely would be much more difficult for them to hire some new people, but I think that those people already involved would probably be suicidal. And this is a perception that we can understand much more in this part of the world because it has nothing to do with logic. Those who are controlling think that if they don't control anymore, they would rather blow the whole thing up. But of course, there are limitations, and it's not as easy to achieve this kind of blackmailing with the whole people and with the whole international community. It's not as simple as it would be.
Mr. Kanan, do you believe that your country is being blackmailed?
I believe that the whole country, yes, and the society, the Lebanese society is being blackmailed and is being used. I mean, Lebanon now is sort of a scene of horrors and political assassinations, as well as we're targeting the Lebanese army in the north. As you know, we're fighting terror in Lebanon, and all these threats are coming at a time when the Lebanese needs so much to be able actually to build their political system freely following the Syrian departure a couple of years ago. So we need to understand very well that what Lebanon is facing now is not at all small. What Lebanon is facing is a huge attack of his democracy, of his political system, of his freedom. And I don't believe at all that in this war against Lebanon, we should be nothing less than united. I don't believe that if we lose democracy, any party will gain. Therefore, it is not an internal matter. It's not an opposition majority thing or issue. For me, it's a national issue. And I believe that today we lost a fine parliamentarian, a fine legislator, somebody with whom maybe I disagreed for a couple of years, but I missed so much his arguments, his style, and his democracy. This is what we need in Lebanon. We need democracy style. We need to enforce our political freedom. We need to actually work on our sovereignty, and by and by shaping our political system in a strong manner, in a democratic manner, we will face all these threats.
And these assassinations certainly aren't helping. Mr. Bahout, many people are accusing Syria and Syria only. Do you agree? And if so, what do they have to gain from this?
You know, it has, I mean, it's maybe cynical to say that this kind of accusation, counter-accusation, denial, etc., has been boring for a while, and I mean, bloodily boring. You know, every time an assassination occurs, we hear the same thing. But I'm very happy today, despite the great wrath and pain that everybody feels today in front of these assassinations, to hear that our two MPs from the opposition and from the majority are very much agreeing on several points. And I think this is the beginning maybe of the way out, because to begin with the origin of the crisis, you know, this crisis is not new. It has been opened 2.5 years ago with the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri. And some people would have thought, and I think Mr. Ahdab is from this camp, that the violence would slow down progressively, and that the tribunal would be a deterrent for whomever, I think it is the Syrian in that case, who are undertaking this wave of violence. But the reality is, unfortunately, exactly the contrary. I think that the tribunal issue is becoming the core reason and the core origin of this violence, which leads me to a big question. I think that if any Lebanese and everybody is concerned, as we heard, about the ways out of this crisis, the question is, how do we put an end to this spiral of violence, knowing that probably Syria is today, as Misbah al-Ahdab has said, defending its head. It's an existential battle that the Syrians are probably waging in Lebanon, facing someone else in Lebanon, the West and the US, and this battle is once again taking place on the Lebanese territory and soil. The question to the Lebanese political class and to the Lebanese society is how to find together a way out of this. I think the answer is twofold. First of all, there must be somewhere a clear and open dialogue with Syria on, the limits of that. And I think the West should send a message to Syria that this tribunal has been set and it is irreversible. And now probably there has to be an engagement with Syria, not on the conditions of Syria, but on the conditions of the Western world, of the civilized world, in order to know where this process would end. But the other part of the process of the solution is an internal Lebanese process and Lebanese solution, which begins by resuming the dialogue in Lebanon and to try to find ways out of this constitutional and political crisis, because we are heading towards a very crucial and important date, which is September, the presidential election. If we reach that date in the prevalent situation today in Lebanon, we are taking a very high risk to enter in a very black tunnel of complicated issues, and this time I think things will be too late to wrap up and to be back on the right track.
Okay, Mr. Akhtar, can you tell me where this assassination leaves the parliamentary majority? Many are saying that this assassination has changed the political equation.
Well, I think that this assassination consolidates the efforts of anyone believing in the Lebanese agenda. The Lebanese agenda meaning rebuilding, reshaping institutions of the country. And here I think that the equation is not anymore 14th and 8th of March. The equation is who's with rebuilding the institutions of Lebanon and who's with maintaining Lebanon used as a proxy battlefield. I think that we don't really have a choice. Unfortunately, we would have loved having the possibility to find a dialogue with Syria, because at the end of the day, we have 75% of our borders with Syria. So we definitely believe that we should be in good terms. But being in good terms with Syria is one thing, and having Syria, in order to accept being in good terms with Lebanon, having free hands on controlling every single detail in Lebanon and undermining, reshaping Lebanese institutions, this is definitely not accepted. So there were threats before, we still are facing threats, but I think that the focus should be on finding a bipartisan attitude inside of Lebanon, on finding a clear program on how to face things. Let me give you something very simple. Now, everybody's talking about a national unity government. I think it's a very good thing having a national unity government, but it's also important to know that a national unity government should be based on a clear program. We have attacks against Lebanon. Lebanon is facing war, like my two colleagues have said. The attacks is not only assassination. We have a group of fighters that cross the borders and they're fighting the Lebanese army. They aggress the Lebanese army.
I'm going to interrupt you there because I'd like to talk about that after the break. But I'd just like to ask Mr. Kanan a question. And it's a question that must be asked. Why has nobody been caught? Firstly, how can these perpetrators get so close to their victims? And how come nobody has been caught? We know that 7 MPs have been shot, or 7 politicians have been shot since 2005.
Yes, actually, this is a valid question, and this is why I wanted to say that we call upon the International Committee investigation that was set up a couple of years ago following the al-Hariri assassination, and now its role has been expanded to investigate, I believe, all the other assassinations, to let us actually cross the bridge from political accusations to condemnations and to judicial condemnation. We need to know exactly, not only by sort of thinking and analyzing and accusing Syria or any other country. Syria, by the way, has an history with Lebanon, and a brutal one. So it is not by only thinking about this history that we can reach a solution. I believe that this international investigation should end positively. We should have a condemnation, and we should know who is actually behind these killings, legally, judiciary, and not only by sort of letting the Lebanese people guess and letting the Lebanese people accuse.
Okay, well, let's take a short break now. So when we come back, we'll take a closer look at what the deteriorating situation in Lebanon means for the future of the country. Stay with us.